Drake just lost 15 executives in 14 months and 3 of them are already sitting inside Kendrick's building. Lock the door. Kill the notifications. Put your phone face down on the table, because what I am about to walk you through did not fall out of a burner account and did not crawl in from a gossip forum. It came off a document. An actual, dated, live-formatted internal document. 15 rows. 5 columns. Names, titles, hire dates, departure dates, and one final column that reads less like a human resources file and more like a battlefield report. And every single person listed on that document is currently walking out the same doorway. The doorway with the owl carved into the frame. The doorway Drake spent his entire adult life building brick by brick. Drake did not just lose a rap battle. Drake did not just lose a courtroom filing. Drake, right now, in the middle of summer 2026, is losing something no bar and no ruling and no press cycle can ever hand back to him. Drake is losing the company from the inside. Drake is losing the people who actually built the machine. And when I say the people leaving, I do not mean the interns. I do not mean the entry-level assistants. I do not mean the anonymous middle rung of the org chart. I mean the executives whose signatures sit on the paperwork of every record Drake has ever released under his own imprint. 3 of them, verified, cross-referenced, and mapped, are already sitting inside the building of the exact man Drake tried to sue his way out of a feud with. Read that line again slower, because that line is the entire story compressed into one sentence. Step back with me, because the shape of that document does not make sense until you understand the 14 months of decisions that turned it into a document in the first place. Roll the tape back to late 2025. Drake files a defamation suit against Universal Music Group, arguing that his own parent label actively promoted a diss record aimed at him, and that the promotion crossed the line from marketing into something closer to sponsored character assassination. Federal Judge Jeanette Vargas throws the entire filing out. Dismissed. Sealed. Buried under judicial silence. Drake appeals. That appeal is still pending. And while every mainstream music writer was busy tracking the appeal, a completely different story was writing itself inside the walls of the imprint. A quieter story. A story you cannot see from the outside because it does not trend on social media. 15 senior-level departures out of one imprint inside a 14-month window is not turnover. That is not attrition. That is an evacuation. That is the vocabulary of a building whose fire alarm has been screaming for a full calendar year, while the man in the corner office keeps insisting the smoke is only fog. And the part almost nobody in the music press has been willing to say out loud is why they are actually leaving. Because it is not one reason. It is 3 reasons layered on top of each other, each one detonating the next. Reason 1 is the lawsuit itself. The internal argument over whether Drake should ever sue Universal fractured OVO along a fault line the building had been pretending did not exist for years. On one side was the loyalty faction, the people who believed that whatever the founder's instinct was, that was the strategy, because the founder is by definition never wrong. On the other side was the industry realism faction. The people who understood that a rap superstar suing his own parent label is a move that has never worked, will never work, and cannot work because the label always outlives the artist. Reason 2 is the appeal itself. Because appealing means the fight continues. Appealing means every executive stays chained to a legal calendar they did not choose. Appealing means every marketing plan runs into a lawyer's calendar before it runs into an audience. Reason 3 is the part people inside the building will only whisper about, and only with the door closed twice. Sources with direct visibility into the business affairs desk are telling me that the alleged plan to walk out of Universal carrying a stash of unreleased material, the so-called 43-song vault, has generated something close to open panic inside the executive tier whose signatures sit on that paperwork. Because if that walkout actually happens and the paperwork ever lands in litigation, then every producer split, every sample clearance, every writing credit, every engineering invoice becomes legal exposure. And every executive whose name appears on any of it becomes a witness or worse, a defendant. So they are not staying. They are not leaving because they suddenly hate Drake. They are not leaving because they stopped believing in the music. They are leaving because they can see the wildfire climbing the hill from. Nobody spends 10 years inside a single company and walks out on an open-ended pause unless something inside that company has quietly become intolerable to their conscience. And the people who know that person are telling me, and I am choosing every syllable carefully because I do not burn sources, that the underlying disagreement traces all the way back to the response to the summer of 2024. The argument going back to the spring of that year was that trading disc records was the wrong response. That filing a lawsuit was an even worse second response. That the correct answer to being named on the biggest disc record of the modern era was not a courtroom filing and not a subpoena, but a full artistic reinvention. A pivot. A rebirth. A 10-year veteran creative director does not spend a full decade inside the building and then request an open-ended pause because the coffee stopped tasting right. That person was overruled in the meetings that mattered. That person is now on leave with no return date on the calendar. If my sources are reading this correctly, and I have every reason to believe they are, then what OVO just lost is not just a creative director. OVO just lost the last honest voice in the room. The last person willing to look Drake in the eye and say, "This is not the direction." The last person whose disagreement Drake was actually willing to sit through, even if he did not act on it. And when the last honest voice walks out, what remains is not a strategy team. What remains is an echo chamber. And an echo chamber has never in the recorded history of the entertainment business saved a career from a strategic crisis. Echo chambers accelerate the crisis every single time, without exception. Now zoom out with me, because on the exact opposite side of the same industry, at the exact same moment, pgLang is doing something OVO is not doing. pgLang is hiring. pgLang is expanding. pgLang, according to sources with direct visibility into the Imprints org chart, has added 7 senior positions in the last 11 months. Every single one of those 7 hires was pulled directly from a competitor. Every single one of them was recruited with equity baked into the offer sheet, not just a salary line and a bonus target. And at least 2 of them, and this is the detail that made me open the document a second time to make sure my eyes had not slipped, are coming directly off the same 15-row exit list I have been describing for this entire video. 2 of Drake's own executives are already sitting inside Kendrick Lamar's company. 2 of them. Read that twice, because that is not turnover. That is a transfer of talent capital between rival empires. That is the historical fingerprint of a dynasty collapsing in real time. Rome did not fall in an afternoon. Rome fell when the generals began riding out of the capital and swearing loyalty to the general camped outside the walls. And right now, in the summer of 2026, the generals of OVO are riding out. Some of them are already inside the pgLang building. Some of them are counting the days ticking down on their non-compete clauses. And Drake himself, based on every report crossing my desk for the last month, is spending most of his time in Toronto in the studio, trying to finish the material that will decide whether he re-signs with Universal for another cycle, or walks out with the vault and discovers the hard way that no imprint of any real size wants to absorb an artist whose senior team just evacuated the last one. And this is the angle every mainstream outlet has missed for 18 months straight. Because everybody is still covering this feud as if it is a music story. It stopped being a music story the day the first executive walked out. It is now a corporate story. A boardroom story. A story about who controls the operating infrastructure of hip-hop for the next decade. And the answer, if this exit list is accurate at even 80%, has already been decided. It is just waiting for the paperwork to catch up. Here is the domino that matters most, because OVO was never actually supposed to be just a record label. OVO was supposed to be a lifestyle empire. That is the piece that keeps getting shaved off every time this conversation collapses into a scoreboard. The fashion line. The rumored streaming platform. The Toronto Raptors branding relationship. The Nitol imprint expansion. Every single one of those extensions was scaffolded on top of the assumption that OVO Sound would remain a top priority universal imprint with a full marketing budget and a functional executive bench. Every single one of those assumptions is now sitting in cold storage. You cannot launch a fashion line when your senior creative director is on an open-ended pause. You cannot launch a streaming platform when your business affairs team is quietly polishing resumes. You cannot build a lifestyle empire when the empire is bleeding executives faster than it is signing artists. Map it row by row and cross-reference it with what pgLang is doing on the other side, and the exit list will tell you something the diss records never told you. Kendrick Lamar was never trying to win a rap battle. Kendrick was trying to win the industry itself. And the difference between those two ambitions is the difference between one loud night and one quiet decade. A rap battle is a night. A dynasty is a decade. And a decade is exactly what pgLang is quietly assembling right now, using the pieces that used to belong to Drake. Stay with me, because the next layer connects everything on the board. The reason the OVO exit list is happening inside this specific 14-month window and not 5 years ago is because the entire incentive structure of the major label ecosystem has quietly flipped. For 20 years, the safest, most lucrative place for a senior hip-hop executive was inside a major label imprint attached to a superstar artist. That was the golden path. The equity share was small. The salary was strong. The prestige was enormous. What pgLang is now offering, according to two people who have been in the room during recruitment conversations, is structurally different. pgLang is offering equity. Real equity. Actual ownership positions inside an independent operation that intends to stay independent for the long haul. And the second that offer exists on the table in this industry, the golden path stops looking golden. The golden path starts looking like a pension plan from the last century. That is the piece nobody outside the boardroom fully understands yet. Drake did not just lose a courtroom decision. He did not just lose a feud. Drake lost the recruiting war. Because the moment a rival imprint starts handing out real equity in a business that intends to stay in family hands, every senior executive across the industry starts running math they were not running the year before. And the math, for anyone whose primary loyalty is to their own career rather than to any one artist, comes out in favor of the rival every single time. Now that leave column makes even more sense. Because if that 10-year veteran creative director is on an open-ended pause with no return date on any internal calendar, then the person the industry should actually be watching is not the one who left. The person the industry should be watching is the one that person is quietly meeting with during that pause. Nobody with that resume takes an open-ended break to weed the garden. Somebody with that resume takes an open-ended break to have the kind of conversations that legally cannot happen while an existing contract is still active. And when the pause ends, we are going to see exactly where those conversations landed. And I would put real money, based on every source I have talked to, on a landing pad with a specific black and gold logo stamped on the door. Here's what I think comes next, because you have been asking me the same question in the comments for 3 straight weeks, and you deserve a real answer. This is a read, not a scoop. OVO survives 2026. But VO does not survive 2026 as the same company. What emerges on the other side of Q4, based on every conversation I have had and every document I have been able to review, is a dramatically compressed imprint. A skeleton crew focused almost entirely on Drake's own catalog. A marketing footprint that looks nothing like the OVO of two. That is the thing the mainstream press will not yet say out loud, because saying it out loud means declaring this feud over on terms more brutal than any diss track ever wrote. The feud ended when the generals started defecting. The feud ended when the equity started moving. The feud ended when the 15-row document got printed and started circulating. And the last honest voice on the OVO side is on leave, return date open. So the next time somebody in your group chat tries to tell you Drake is fine, ask them a different question. Do not ask about streaming totals. Do not ask about tour grosses. Ask who is still in the building. Ask who signed off on the last 3 creative decisions. Ask why a 15-row document exists in the first place, and why 3 of the rows are printed in red. Ask why the senior creative director closest to Drake is on leave with no return date. Because this feud was never about who won the rap battle. This feud was about who is building infrastructure and who is building headlines. And right now the infrastructure is walking out of one building and pooling into another. The headlines, for whatever they are worth, are running 6 months behind the actual story. Look at the moment where the historical parallels line up, because this is not the first time an empire in music has hemorrhaged its executive tier while the founder was distracted by a public feud. It happened to Death Row. It happened to Bad Boy in its later cycle. It happened to Cash Money before the family patched itself back together. Every single one of those imprints lost the boardroom before they lost the culture. Every single one of those imprints ignored the exit list until the exit list became the obituary. The receipts are stapled to the door of history. Drake's team knows this. The executives leaving know this. And the ones already sitting inside pgLang know it better than anybody, because they are the ones who made the calculation early and moved first. There is no argument about which imprint is currently trending upward. The full exit list is being cross-referenced against public LinkedIn changes by two separate reporters, one at a legacy trade publication and one at an independent outlet I trust with my sourcing. When those cross-references are complete, and I expect that within a few weeks, we come back with names, titles, and destinations. Not rumor. Verified. Documented. On the record. Until then, remember what I told you at the beginning. Rome did not fall in an afternoon. Rome fell when the generals started riding out. And in the summer of 2026, the generals are riding out of the OVO capital. The empire that used to run hip-hop is bleeding out one signed exit agreement at a time. Subscribe and turn the bell on, because this story has just entered its second act, and the third act is going to redraw the corporate map of hip-hop for the next decade. Drop a comment and tell me who you think that unnamed veteran on row 7 actually is. Tell me which of the 15 you think lands at pgLang next. Tell me whether you believe OVO survives 2026 as a real imprint or only as a memory. Because the room where this outcome is being decided is not the courtroom, and it is not the recording studio. The room is the boardroom. And the boardroom right now has a Drake-shaped hole in the middle of it that nobody inside the building has figured out how to fill. There is a version of this story the mainstream music press will tell. It goes something like this. Drake lost a feud. He lost a lawsuit. He is having a rough 18 months. He will bounce back. He always bounces back. He has money. He has fans. He has hits. That version of the story is not wrong. It is just incomplete. It is the version told by people who are still counting streams and press cycles as if those are the metrics that decide who wins a decade. They are not. The metrics that decide who wins a decade are executive retention, equity distribution, partnership pipeline, and the ability to attract senior talent away from competitors on the strength of your future rather than the memory of your past. On every single one of those 4 metrics, Drake is currently losing. And on every single one of those 4 metrics, Kendrick Lamar is currently winning by a margin large enough to see from orbit. Drake is not stupid. He is reading the same document I am reading. He is doing the same math the people leaving are doing. The question is what Drake does about it. And I want to be careful here, because I do not know him personally, and I do not have a source inside his inner circle telling me what he is planning next. What I do have is the pattern of behavior Drake has shown for the last 3 years. That pattern says Drake does not retreat quietly. He escalates. He counterpunches. He locates the loudest possible response to the quietest possible problem, and then he lets the response become the entire story so that the underlying problem never has to be discussed on its own terms. If that pattern holds, then the exit list is about to become the trigger for something considerably louder. A public statement. A surprise signing announcement. A surprise release. Something engineered to reset the narrative and distract from the fact that the infrastructure underneath the narrative is walking out the front door. And every single time Drake pulls that lever in the next 6 months, remember what we mapped out here. The lever does not fix the exit list. The lever only changes what everybody is looking at while the exit list keeps getting longer. Because that is the thing about an evacuation. Once an evacuation starts, it does not stop when the loudest person in the room orders it to stop. An evacuation stops when the building is empty or when the fire is out. And right now, from where I am sitting, with the document open on my desk and the timestamps lining up cleanly with the public record, the fire is not out. The fire is still climbing. And Drake, whether he wants to admit it publicly or not, is standing in the middle of the room politely asking the smoke to leave. The smoke is not leaving. The smoke is spreading. Every executive with a spare pair of shoes and a working phone is already picking up the coat by the door. That is the story. That is what the 15 rows actually say. That is what the red text in column E actually means. And that is why, when this feud finally gets its proper obituary, the obituary will not be printed inside a rap magazine. The obituary will be printed inside a business filing. The builders, the ones who actually stack the bricks, never announce themselves in the middle of the storm. They announce themselves in the paperwork 6 months after the storm has moved on. And when the paperwork drops, everybody who is busy arguing about disc records and tour totals is going to look up from the scoreboard and discover that the game they thought they were watching was never the game that was actually being played. The game being played is a corporate war. The war has a winner. The winner is already staffing up. The loser is already bleeding executives. The rest is just the paperwork catching up to the reality on the ground. So tell me in the comments who you think that unnamed veteran on row 7 actually is. Tell me which imprint you think swallows the last of Avio's talent bench first. Tell me whether you think Drake pulls the lever loud enough to change the story, or whether the story is already too far ahead of him to catch. And press subscribe, because Act 3 is loading. Act 3 is where the corporate map of hip-hop for the next 10 years actually gets drawn. And when Act 3 drops, you are going to want to have already been in the room.